Okay, so in reference to tomorrow, I really can't make any promises on whether or not we'll be doing that activity just because of student absences. And it is most beneficial if we can have everybody here. That's the goal of looking at a clam, okay? And you can see and observe some of the internal structures that we'll be talking about in the near future, and some of the reasons why these animals look the way they do and how they feed the way they do. It's just examples like that that we want to make sure that we have everyone here. And if it doesn't work out, well, that's why, again, I can't make any promises, but that is our goal. But my guess is right now we would probably not be doing that tomorrow. We maybe wait till Monday or something to that extent. Okay? But we are going to do it. It's not one of them things, well, geez, we're going to push it back a day. We're going to push it back a day. And you're thinking in my mind, if I do that long enough, they'll forget. No, we're still going to go through and do this. It's just a matter of when we're going to go through and do this. Okay. So is this where we left off with? Because I remember we're going to start talking about the shell here shortly. Because I think that is this, but I can't remember if we left talking about. I remember the creep locomotion, something to that extent. Okay, and the reason that something like this could be, or not could be, but is important is because it's one of your vocab terms, and we're talking about an open circulatory system. So without any further content, what can you tell me about, if there's open, there must be closed, which there is. So what can you tell me about a circulatory system? We're not worried about open or closed, because there is some similarities. So what would you presume has to be part of a circulatory system? There's going to be blood, yes. You have to have a pumping heart. Not just veins, you're right. That's one of them. You're not wrong. Arteries, okay. And then that's where the similarity then would end between an open and a closed circulatory system. So one way to visualize that, and unfortunately this can be part of industrial accidents, and I think when you view it this way, maybe it makes the most sense. We know that hydraulic pressure, okay, how cylinders work, massive amounts of pressure inside of those structures. So we're talking about lifting a bucket on a payloader or a tractor, okay? So that's what we're getting at here. Or skid loader, you could say as well. And even in the military, I think when you raise something that heavy, isn't there some sort of safety device on skid loaders? There's a track. I think they're called jury struts on some of this equipment. And what I mean is when you lift something really heavy, both arms here are part of the cylinders lifting a bucket on a tractor or a skid loader. But especially on a skid loader, because it's tough to get away from that if it falls down. But I think there's a metal sleeve that when you lift that all the way up, you drop that metal sleeve onto that cylinder, so then it's a bracket. So what's going to happen if one of those cylinders starts to leak fluid, a lot of fluid? Because if it's the pressure of the fluid inside the hoses that lift that up, okay, what happens if all of that fluid gets released at once? You said, but just say it again. It's going to drop, and anything underneath there could be pinned. So once you have that up there, okay, and I think, again, I don't know if they're called jury struts, that's just what we call them, that metal track then gets dropped on that cylinder, okay? So should that let go, all of a sudden it drops like this. It maybe can go about that far, however high you have that bucket lifted. And I think you could say the same thing if you're a mechanic and you have a hydraulic lift in your shop. You're lifting that up and up and up, and then with if you're in there, you might hear click, click, click. So there's metal brackets in four corners that every time you hear that click, those brackets are going to hold that cylinder up. Should you be a mechanic working on there, it's not going to drop on top of you. So you might be thinking, well, what does hydraulics have to do with circulation? Well, you could say really nothing. But our point is, if that fluid is released from that cylinder, the pressure gets released. So you could say there is no pressure. Would that be a fair presumption to make? Okay. So what would you guess the pressure is like in an open circulatory system then? Is there pressure in there or is there not?
Yeah, there's pressure.
Maybe a little, but not what we would think of. So I would say not, because what happens is, how many people eat oysters in here? Okay, so is that something that is maybe something that you could have at, it doesn't have to be family gatherings, but some people might say, every Christmas we got to have oyster stew. Does that sound familiar? And maybe there's certain, if you get together with family members, they might do that. But with oysters, is it possible, because I saw a few hands go up, when we start talking about these clams and you see the internal structures, do you think it's going to change your perception of whether you want to consume oysters again or not? Maybe, and you say probably, maybe it will, maybe it won't. But what happens is the circulation inside these clams, remember we said that these animals, they just creep along. So what happens is the muscular contraction causes this creeping motion. But because these animals do not have pressure inside of their circulatory system, it pools inside these muscles. And when they contract, it pushes it back into the bloodstream. Because remember, there's no pressure, so it has to be a way to get to an open area and back into the bloodstream. A closed circulatory system doesn't have that, because you correctly said blood. That's true. You said a pumping heart. That's true. You said veins. That's right. Arteries. That's right. But what are really tiny vessels that would connect arteries to veins? Yeah, there's capillaries inside of there. So what happens is that's what makes it pressurized. It's not going to an open area, because in some of these animals that have an open circulatory system, it goes through arteries, arterioles, to open sinuses. These muscular contractions then push that blood back into the bloodstream. In other words, venules, veins, and back to the heart. You might be saying, well, if there's no pressure in there, how's it not going backwards? Well, it probably does to a certain extent. But again, every time that this muscular contraction takes place, it's going to keep pushing that blood forward. And it really doesn't matter if the blood flows backwards, because they don't have breathing lungs. They have breathing gills. So they just extract that oxygen through the water through a process we know as diffusion. Okay. So for protective functions, there's three components to, as you can see, the shell here. And how you keep them separate, that's one of the ways that you maybe want to try to work out on your own. Since this is the outer layer, maybe using alphabetization, saying on the outside working in, this start has E, that one has R, so that must be further inside. Okay, so then the difference between these is going to be the components of it. Okay, what I mean by that, we have this prismatic layer that's further inside, because remember, if we're using alphabetizing, we start on the outside, work in, we got the peristratum, so then That is on the outside. The prismatic layer is on the inside. And we see a protein matrix that's associated with the prismatic layer. And then it's this nacreous layer. I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. Okay. So notice that this is a thin matrix as opposed to, we could just say that this is densely packed and maybe say that this is a thick matrix, and then the nacreous layer is a thin matrix. Okay? It's just extra layers of, you could say, protection. Nature selected them to have these 3 layers. Now, this occurs in, as you can see, the shell, of course. Why? Well, because we're telling you that. There's certain types of other structures that occur in layers as well, and that would be with muscle. And you might say, well, what does this have to do with muscle? So if we know anything about human anatomy, take a deep breath.
I don't remember all 3.
Okay. And it's not that we would have to remember all 3, but within the abdomen, okay, there's oblique muscles. How do you tell the difference?
The way that the grooves in the muscles, like they
That's,
one go like this, one go flat. I don't know what that means.
well, exactly, but you're being too specific. You gave too many examples, which is good, because you said at a diagonal. Okay? I believe the outside goes like this, then the inside goes like. So you're not entirely wrong, but if that's how the fibers are oriented, which one's on the outside? And don't worry about the orientation, just the naming of it. We said obliques. So what would be on the outside, what would be on the inside? Because if I tell you, you're going to say, oh, I knew that.
I don't remember.
Okay? So when this radio is plugged in, it gets its power from an external source.
Oh, external.
External oblique and internal oblique, okay? So just like how the man upstairs designed us, we got different fibrous layers of muscles, some that go this way and then some that go this way. Well, you can't see that because it's so bright. Some muscles that go this way, some that go this way and create a crisscross pattern. These muscles occur in layers, okay? Which they also do a protective function, muscles do, but nothing like having a shell. Because when we talk about protection for our body, muscles do it, yes, that's true, but we don't really associate muscles as a major protective function. We leave that to what body system? Yeah, bones, okay? All right, so I want to do, come on here. I want to do this one, that one, and then we'll maybe move on to the gastropods tomorrow. Okay, come on, back up here. Okay, so this is what we were talking about earlier, okay? Whether it's open or closed. You correctly said there's blood, there's a pumping heart, and then when we're talking about blood vessels, that's both arteries and veins. See here, I think I hit the started. Yep, I did. Okay, it's still recording. All right. Now, one of the things that we're going to see is a reoccurring theme in the animal kingdom, okay, is that this is the first time we've seen this term with animals, okay? But with your, I don't want to say limited knowledge, because we just haven't discussed that a whole lot, not even in biology, but, and you may have learned this term in elementary, in middle school, but what do we mean by kidneys? Does anyone know what a kidney will do? Has something to do with the blood and for humans and mammals. Does anyone know what the kidney might do? And it does work with the liver in certain aspects. Exactly. Say that again, though. Yeah, it filters material. So what we mean by that is, as we look around, we could say, okay, what would you presume is in here? Coffee. And the reason I say look around is usually we see different types of, I used to have them in here, some Coke bottles, and because I use that when I'm driving for cross country, I'll just use that to have something to drink. So then, what is it about coffee or Coca-Cola? There's something in there that's not beneficial. Well, it's not, I wouldn't say that it's totally non-beneficial for humans, but in certain ways, yes, it's the caffeine. So why, if it's not good for us, why do we drink it? There are some benefits to it, though. Yeah, we call that a stimulant, okay? And it helps you remember things. I believe there's other various factors that caffeine does for us, but to an overextended amount is probably not good for us. So notice we don't have people having excessive problems with drinking large amounts of caffeine. I mean, there could be. I don't know what you would say extreme or large amounts would be, but it doesn't accumulate in the body. How or why is that? Because, oh, I was off a little bit. Because the kidneys will filter that out, okay? Because we said it kind of works with the liver. There's going to be one of two things. Either it gets filtered out, or the liver is going to filter it out and make it a usable form. Or if the liver filters it out, sends it to the kidneys then separate even further, like you said, and then it gets sent with water to the bladder, and then that's how we get rid of materials. But in this case, the reason I say a reoccurring theme is this has nothing to do with mammals and humans, does it? You would say humans don't have this process for. What would we associate this more if it's those mammals and humans? This term and that term. Not excretion, but rather what? Especially during, before the calving season can take place. Calving season takes place because of reproduction, okay? So in certain invertebrates, fish, probably amphibians, it certainly happens in reptiles, we'll talk about this, and then also certain birds then as well, is that this kidney, it does filtering, and it also has reproductive functions. But that's not the case for mammals and humans. But that's for another time and another place. And then finally, we will wrap up with this, and then tomorrow we'll begin with that of the gastropods. So Several. Okay? This is not totally new. Okay? This we could say is new. Okay? Because when we talk about a system then, why would we possibly say that this is going to be a lot further in depth? We could say it's because of this, because until now there are certain animals that do move. That is true. But that movement is because of these. And what animals have we talked about that actually can and or do move up to this point? So it's not mollusks. Okay, exactly, jellyfish. So is it a complex movement? No, not by any means. So it's a very limited amount of ganglion. Okay? It's because when we get to some of these animals later on in this chapter, okay, is their intelligence that's going to begin with that of the mollusks. Oddly enough, there are some highly intelligent mollusks. Now you might think, how do you even define intelligence? And maybe that would be a good question to ask as well. But when we look at invertebrates and thinking, okay, these are just mollusks, they're invertebrates, they're really not that smart. Well, one of the things we're going to see a little later on, I don't know when that'll be, but would you consider intelligence if a cephalopod, which could be squid, could be octopods, and it could be cuttlefish. Those are all three portions of cephalopods.
The nautilus.
Oh, yes, okay, the nautilus, that's right. Because I was thinking, okay, is that really, that's a mollusk, does it belong with the cephalopods? Yes, it does. Okay, so yes, the nautilus. Of those, with your limited knowledge, who is the genius of all of those? It's probably really not the nautilus, okay? And maybe you could be arguing, say, oh, well, yeah, I think a nautilus is pretty smart, but
Probably the squid or the octopus.
I would say it's more so the octopods. I'm not saying that squid are not, but cuttlefish are known to have high intelligence as well, and that's something that we'll observe. It's just the idea of when we talk about higher order of animals, especially that of, per se, mammals, we consider dogs being highly intelligent because do they respond to our emotions and how we talk to them? Of course. Can you teach dogs tricks? Yes, we consider that intelligence. But what are you thinking when it's not that you're talking to a fish, cuttlefish, but do you think you could teach them to learn? And the answer is essentially yes. That's what experiments tell us. But is that intelligence on its own? An invertebrate that can solve very basic puzzles? And I think the answer would be yes, because we really don't think about intelligence until you get to the vertebrates, which is next semester. Okay, so that's all I have. We'll catch up to you next time.